Alright, this is the next project on the list for my restoration of the 1953 Allis Chalmers B model. This will be the teardown and inspection video for the engine. It did run when it was parked, seemed to run pretty well, no smoke or anything like that, so I'm interested to see what we find. Just a quick walk around here, check everything out. Definitely needs a manifold. Something I noticed on my clutch pressure plate, the fingers are worn pretty bad, especially that one on top. Looks like I'm going to need a new pressure plate because the parts tractor actually has the same amount of wear. This flywheel has seen better days. The teeth are worn off. We had a starter Bendix issue for years, and we would weld the teeth back on the Bendix and file them to the right shape. More than once, actually, and this is the outcome of that. The flywheel on the parts tractor has a perfect ring gear, so we're going to go with that one. Okay, so first step is to remove the pressure plate, clutch, flywheel, and oil pump so we could mount the bracket for the engine stand. Alright, here we are. So, even after sitting for 20-something years, it spins free, it turns fine, so I don't suspect we'll find any water intrusion anywhere. Time to remove the pressure plate. Okay. This clutch disc has seen better days. Springs are pretty loose, spines look good, but we're worn down, almost ready to touch rivets there. Pressure plate itself, it's worn, but nothing super major there. The issue we run into is the wear on the clutch fingers. And this one, the end of it's actually worn off. And if we look at these others from the side a little bit, I'm not sure if this shows up in camera, but these are about to break off. If I could find these fingers separately, I might be able to rebuild this. These come apart completely. And from 2 pressure plates, I could probably build a good one. There's a broken spring here. That spring would normally go into the finger here. Alright, time to remove the flywheel. Alright. Flywheel doesn't look too bad. With the teeth, there's some wear on the ring gear here. We can see it all the way around. Let me try to get that where it'll show up on camera a little better. This is the worst side. Sometimes we'd actually have to rock this engine a little bit to get it to a good spot so we can start it. There's a brass bushing here. This bushing supports the input shaft. This pilot bushing. And the way this pilot bushing is lubricated is it gets an oil supply from the crankshaft through this piece of felt. Actually can't get it out of there, but there's a piece of felt in here. and oil comes from the main bearing, saturates this felt, which oils that bushing. So it loses oil over time, which is probably Alright, next step, we'll remove the oil pump here. Okay, I went ahead and scraped off some of the crud here, off camera. Make this a little easier to do. Got 3 large bolts that hold the oil pump on. These 3 screws hold the cover on. When we go to rebuild it, we'll remove those. Take a brass hammer here and see if we can loosen it up some. I don't want it to pop all the way off and hit the ground, so put a screw in it just to hold it if it drops. Wonder if I can. There we go. Alright. That actually looks really clean. Turns free and very smooth. We'll still open it up and see what it looks like inside later. See a spring for a pressure relief valve. So what's interesting about this setup with this particular engine is there is no oil gallery in this block at all. The way the lubrication system runs is this hole right here is your pickup. So it sucks oil out of the oil pan through this hole into the pump. Then the pump pumps it out of 2 different places. It sends oil out the end of this shaft that's used to drive it, and oil out of this tube that exits the top of the bell housing here. This tube supplies oil to the cylinder head, and then another tube goes over to supply oil to the governor. The cam bearings and the main bearings receive their oil supply through this shaft. So the camshaft itself is right here. The camshaft is what drives this pump. The camshaft is the oil gallery. It's hollow and it fills with oil, and the oil enters the camshaft bearings, and there's a groove around the camshaft that we'll look at a little later. And there is actually a hole drilled from the camshaft bearing down to the main bearings. So the oil exiting the camshaft into the camshaft bearings will enter the main bearings. So, all right, next step, we are going to remove this cover because it's a little easier to get off now before I put that engine stand on. So this cover itself just houses the rear main seal. There's 2 screws on the bottom that come in from the oil pan. And then we have these 6. This was definitely before the days of RTV, so it wasn't glued in place. Just had a couple crushed up gaskets. Here is our rear main seal. I'm not sure what the material is. It looks to be some kind of felt or leather or something. It's probably just felt that's compressed. Crankshaft doesn't look too bad. There's 3 grooves in here, but those are supposed to be there. I think they're there to hold oil, to lubricate the seal. I'm not sure. Alright, time to wash hands and mount the engine stand. Alright, show you a close-up of a couple items before we mount the stand. If you look there, you can see the camshaft. That little pin across the camshaft there will actually engage this shaft for the oil pump. Another thing you can see is the wick here that is supposed to lubricate the pilot bearing, or bushing in this case. I don't know. I mean, I see some oil here, but that wick's awfully dry. And here's a sneak peek inside. What do we see in there? I can see the front cover all the way across. Oil pickup, dipstick, a little bit of sludge, not horrible. That pickup tube runs to here. This is your suction side of the oil pump. Okay, time to roll the hoist in here and lift it up. Something I wanted to mention here. Notice earlier when I talked about the oil path to the bearings, I never said anything about an oil filter. The oil filter on these actually filters the oil that is not used for the bearings. So what it does is it splits up the oil flow. Your pump would be mounted here. You have a tube that comes up and feeds oil to this fitting. Now this fitting goes two directions. One way is it goes up here to lubricate the valve train. Then I don't have it installed here, but there's another tube that runs to the governor to lubricate the bushings in the governor. The other path goes to the oil filter. So it goes up under to this center, and the oil goes in through the filter element and then drains out this hole into the block and then just lands into the oil pan, into the crankcase. So the oil filter does not filter the oil that is going into the bearings, essentially. It filters the oil that is not being used. So it's continuously cleaning the oil, but not necessarily directly cleaning the oil that it's going to use at that moment. The shop manual says it filters 1/6 of the oil as it's being pumped. Alright, for some reason I didn't turn my camera on. I removed the generator to make room for to get access to the manifold bolt in the front here. Already took the nuts off. So it's pretty crusty. I pulled it loose earlier and the gasket fell out. But there's no water or signs of water, but there's signs of bugs and dirt and everything else. This manifold needs to get replaced anyway. It's far enough rusted through here. Alright, next step, we'll remove the thermostat housing. I think I could reuse this gauge. Alright, you can see the spring for the thermostat in there. The thermostat actually looks broken. But normally you take these two bolts out and pull that bottom cover off to replace the thermostat. Alright, time to remove the valve cover. I've already had it off because I attach the chain to a couple head bolts to pull the engine. So. Tell you what, there's a ton of play here, and it's not in a good spot. Let me move the camera to see if I could show you. Okay. That's what I noticed. I'm moving these rocker arms. If you look right in here in this bushing in the rocker arm, that's where your play is at. So, it's either the shaft is worn or the rocker arm's worn or a combination of both. This one's the same way. This one too. So I imagine they all are that way. That was pretty bad. In the end here, there's a cork. So they shove a cork in the shaft and put that cotter pin through it. Got another one on the other side. The only work that was ever done on this engine while we had it, my dad did a valve job on it. I think it might have been pretty shortly after we got it. I don't remember a whole lot about it. I remember him taking it apart, but not much other than that. Something to note here, how the valve train receives oil. Comes through this tube, into this T. Remember, this side goes out to the governor. There's a passageway that goes through here. Then it goes up inside of this tower and fills the shaft with oil. And then there should be holes in the shaft that lubricate each bushing. Alright, so now we're going to remove the rocker arm assembly. Alright, some of these, the whole stud came out. So our pivot points, the adjusting screws here, where it sits in the push rods, seem to be in good shape. A little wear on the rocker arm where it contacts the valve, but not horrible. Well, I could see why the valve train would be worn a little bit. The oil passage is plugged up. Let me get the camera closer to show you. Okay, remember, oil enters this T. Get this gasket out of the way. Goes through a passageway, and the way it gets to the rocker shaft is through a groove in this stud, and it flows up that groove and enters the rocker shaft. And that groove looks pretty crusty. All the push rods look like they're in decent shape. There's so much slack in here. Let's see if we can find out what's causing it. So first step, we gotta straighten out this cotter pin. So we have a washer. Yeah, this one's got a bit of play in it too, not as bad as the other one. Just clean it out and see what we can find. Yeah, I could see the wear in there. I'm not sure if that's even going to show up on camera. It's real shiny on the bottom half. It doesn't look flattened out or ovaled or anything, at least not to my eye, but okay. This tower is the front. This one over here is the one that received lubrication, so we'll check it out and see if it's plugged up. Oh yeah, there's a lot of play in that one. It doesn't look bad. Ooh, yeah, it's going to be the shaft itself. I'll get all these off and we'll get a closer look. Let me get these in order. Yeah, it really does not seem to be the rocker arms that are worn too bad. It's not looking at every one of them just yet, but kind of the 1-2 skip a few method. Yeah, you could see some color change, but I can't really feel it. I don't feel anywhere. Alright, this is the stand. It doesn't even want to come off that way, so let's pull this other pin on this side. It's cruddy in there, but I think that groove is definitely filled in. That groove on the stud. Yeah, so this is the bottom half. And there's some definite grooves there. So we'll take a look at the parts tractor head later and see what it looks like. It might be good enough. Some people say you could just turn this over and use the good side. That might not be great for oil pressure. Interesting thing here is there are no holes for oil to get directly to the bearing or the bushing. What it looks like is oil comes out of these large holes. Oh yeah, there's a groove for it in this. On these towers, it's able to seep over to the bushing itself. Alright, next step, we'll pull the head. Alright, stick a pry bar under the edge here to break it loose. Alright. Cylinders are glassy smooth. So I see an issue here. I'm hoping to use this block because this block is the serial number I want. Since this tractor is sentimental and all. But the parts tractor block looks a whole lot better. Let me move the camera closer to show you what I'm talking about. So between each cylinder, there's a crack. In 3 places. This is pretty common, actually. And most people just go with it because the gasket seals against this surface to stop coolant from leaking from that crack. And your combustion is sealed on the sleeve. That one right there is pretty big though. So I don't know, if it was 1, I'd probably go with it for sure. 3, maybe not. I need to do a little research. Let me go over to the parts engine just to show you what it should look like. This is the parts tractor we took apart today. Alright, on the cylinder head, turn it over, take a peek. Looks pretty much like I would have expected. A lot of carbon. It looks like this head gasket was put on with silicone, which is a no-no, but apparently it's holding. Alright, let's pull a couple valves and see what that looks like. Alright. This is a valve spring installer remover tool. Well, really it just installs and removes the keepers. So I'm going to use this to remove the keepers. To start with, you want to tap the edge of the retainer to break them loose if it's crusty like this. Kind of at a little bit of an angle. It helps. It helps if there's a rag underneath the cylinder, in the combustion chamber, holding up the valve. In this case, I have one on this cylinder, so this is the one we'll do first. See how it goes. There's a magnet inside of this tool that holds everything. So you push down until it clicks. Sometimes you got to tap it with a hammer. Other times it works by hand. In this case, it worked by hand. Keepers are in here. They can't get lost. So then you do whatever you got to do. I don't need to on this because it's coming apart, but I want to show you how quick it is to put it together with this tool. Leave the spring there. Put your keepers inside of the retainer and set it on top of the valve. Now you insert this piece. This is for installing. So this spring-loaded part spreads the keepers, and the outer ring presses down the retainer. So you push it down. Sometimes you hear a click. Sometimes you just feel it. In that case, it didn't go all the way in. That's it. So if we want to take it out again, yep, only got one keeper that time. There we go. Now these other ones won't come out yet because I need to put a rag under there to keep the valves from going down. In that case, that one there, the rag wasn't positioned right, so it's letting the valve push down. There we go. That one was just pretty sticky. All right, so springs themselves. There's a couple checks we would do with this. One to see if they're square, so we'd set it on a flat surface, make sure it's not leaning. I have not looked up specs. There might be an overall height measurement that it needs to meet for them to be considered good. They feel good if that means anything. All right, valves themselves. Got a bit of side to side. I'm not actually measuring this yet, just a quick look. There's a bit of wear there. It's probably not horrible. It's probably might even barely be spec. These seals are hard. They feel like really hard plastic. I assume they used to be rubber, or maybe they are just hard plastic. Find out when I get the new ones. Okay, seats first. They're not horribly worn. This one is very rusted out. It must have been hanging open that whole time. Maybe not rusted out, but very rusted. Without measuring the valve stems, they don't look horrible. They're smooth. There's no edges, or no nothing I could feel. We'll see. I'll need to clean everything up, wire brush it off, and see how we'll approach this. Whether it'll get a full-blown valve job or not, probably will at this point.